Welcome back, everyone. I hope we've all had a go at this introduction question. There was also a video before that, before this video here. So I hope everyone's had a go at watching that as well, because it will help you with what we're doing next. So if you haven't watched it, pause this video and go back to the video above. So we're thinking today about what life would have been like in London in 1666. What do you think it would have been like if you were rich, if you had lots of money? Or if you were poor and you didn't have a lot of money? How do you think people spoke to each other? Do you think they called each other? Where do you think people would go if they were sick? How do you think people got food and water? And as we know, what do you think would happen if there was a fire? I want you to just pause this video, and if you are sitting with someone, have a quick conversation with them. What do you think people would do if they were sick? How do you think they got food and water? How do you think they spoke to each other? Okay, so I've watched the video and I was thinking back to some things that I noticed in the video from before. It showed us what life would have looked like in 1666 in London. So I looked very closely and I could see tiny glass windows, I could see old rotten fruit, I could see some sewage. That's the really stinky stuff that comes from the toilet. I could see narrow streets. That means very skinny. Bless me. You could see narrow streets with very closely together with lots of houses. I could see it was very dark in some places. It didn't get a lot of light. And there was thick black smoke coming out of chimneys and even some hanging stinky meat. I don't know if anybody saw that. So that's what London looked like in 1666. So life in London was hard for many people. It wasn't easy. So they got their food from markets, but it wasn't always fresh. That means that it was sometimes quite old and it would make them sick. They didn't have a fridge to put their food in. So often, if they left it for too long, they would eat their food and then they would feel sick after. The streets were very, very dirty and they were not safe. But why do you think that was? Why was life like that? Well, for a start, there were no toilets in 1666 that could flush because there wasn't the pipes in your house and they didn't have the proper things to make a toilet yet. They didn't know how to. So the way that they would do it was they would use something called a privy. This looks like this. But that was only if you were lucky. If you were rich, you would have a privy. So it was basically, you would sit on here and it's basically just a bowl. And then you'd have to empty it after. So they would empty it. You'd go upstairs in your house, open your window and empty it out of the window onto the street. And people often who were walking past would step in it, or even worse, they'd be walking past and it would land on their head, which would be horrible. Can you imagine if you were walking past somebody's house and they threw out when they'd just been to the toilet? Ugh, it must have been so smelly and horrible. We're very lucky that that doesn't happen now, aren't we? And if you were not rich, you would just have to use a bucket. Or this is called a public privy. So this would have lots of people using it. So it wasn't just for you. So it would just go underground here and stay there. So it would be very, very, very smelly, horrible. That's where the rats would be. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about objects that people used in 1666. So if you have a quick look around your room now or wherever you are, think about what objects you think people didn't have in 1666. So if I look closely around me now, very close to me, I have an iPad. Do you think people had that in 1666? What can you find that you think people didn't have in 1666? Pause the video now and have a quick look. So this was a very important object in 1666. What do you think that was used for? It's a feather. What do we think? If you look closely at the bottom, you might be able to guess. This is a feather quill. So it came from a bird and people used it to write with, and they would dip it into some ink here. So now we have pens, don't we? But back then, there were no such thing as a pen or a pencil. People would have to use feather quills and dip it in black ink, and they'd have to keep dipping it each time. But now we're lucky and we have lots of pens and pencils, felt tips, crayons. We have lots of amazing things. But back in 1666, all they had was a feather quill. What do you think this was? This is a mangle. So this is how people would dry their clothes. So now we either hang them up, don't we, and they dry, or we can put them in a tumble dryer. So that's like a washing machine to dry it. But back then they didn't have anything like that. So the way they would dry their clothes is you would put your t-shirt in the middle here, you turn the wheel, and it would squeeze out all off the water. And you'd have to do it many, many times. You'd have to pull it through, turn it, bring it back, pull it through, turn it, bring it back to get all the water out, and all of the water would go there. So it'd take a long time and it would not be easy. It would be, you have to have really strong muscles to do that. So it was not easy. Now all we have to do is hang them up or put them in the tumble dryer that looks like this. So how about this? What was this bird used for, do you think, in 1666? If you look closely at his leg, you might be able to see something. So this is called a carrier pigeon. So the pigeon used to carry messages. So what you would do is you'd write a letter, roll it up so it looks like this, and you'd put it on here, on the pigeon's foot. The pigeon would then hopefully fly to your friend. But sometimes it would get lost, wouldn't it? So now we're very lucky and we can either just send a message using a phone, we can call somebody, we can send an email on our computer, you use Class Dojo to talk to each other, or we can send a letter by post, by Q post. So we're very, very lucky now, but back then all they had were pigeons to try and send messages and hope that the messages got there. Oh, how about this then? A fire. What do you think a fire was used for in 1666? So fires were very, very important in 1666. Even though a fire caused the Great Fire of London, people had to use fires all the time because it kept them warm. London could get very cold, not like Qatar, much, much, much colder. So people would have to sit around the fire to stay warm. So in England now, we have radiators. They are things that keep us warm. But back then, they would have to use fire. Fire was also a good way to light a candle to help us to see at night time. Now we have lamps, we have light bulbs. How about this? What do you think this was used for in 1666? This looks interesting. So this was an oven. So our ovens now look like this, or we can even have a microwave. Back then, this is what an oven looked like. And that's what Thomas Farriner's oven would have looked like in the bakery that wasn't put out properly. So you used to just light a fire inside the oven and cook your food that way. Now it's much safer in a microwave, or our ovens look like this now, because that way it's quite dangerous. The fire could easily spread. How about this? What do you think this was used for in 1666? I think we might know the answer to this one. That's how people travelled around, didn't they? There were no such thing as cars, no such thing as bikes or scooters or buses. People travelled by horse and cart. So let's think about jobs now. What jobs did people have in 1666? I wonder if it'll be the same, because now we have doctors, we have police, we have nurses. Well, I wonder what these jobs are. So this first job is called a chimney sweep. So in 1666, one of the jobs was to clean chimneys and fireplaces. A chimney is at the top of your house where the smoke comes out. Not all houses have them, especially in Qatar. But in England, everybody had a chimney because you would light the fire and that would be where the smoke would come out, so it doesn't stay in your house. So people called chimney sweeps would have to go up this tiny chimney. It was a very horrible job, very dark, very dangerous in case you got stuck. And they would use this duster to clean it. That was their job. Very difficult, very horrible job. And actually, a lot of the time, children would be used as that job because they're small. You're small, so you can fit up the chimney. Very dangerous, though. And there was something called a blacksmith who would make things out of iron or steel, like they'd make knives, or they would fix things that were broken. We kind of have those today. We have blacksmiths today that still exist. We'd have someone called a rat catcher whose job was just to catch rats that they saw. Would you like that to be your job, going around catching rats? Ugh. There was a Gong Farmer. This was the worst job, I think. He used to go around cleaning the toilets. So cleaning those horrible buckets that we saw before. Must have been very smelly and horrible. There was a job called a spinster that women used to do. So they would make clothes using this wheel. So they'd turn and turn and turn the wool to make their own clothes. Now we just go to the mall to buy our clothes, don't we? But back then they had to make their own clothes. It would take them a very long time. A chandler. He used to make and sell candles. Back then, candles were very important. Everybody needed candles for nighttime so they could see. But now we can go to a shop, can't we, and buy candles? But there's lots of other things in that shop. We don't need candles as much now. We buy them because they smell nice or they look nice. But back then, they needed them to be able to see. So his job would have been very important, selling candles to people so they could see. We have a scullery maid. So their job was to clean in the kitchen, to clean in the house, to clean in the building. So we still have cleaners today. A carpenter. We still have carpenters. They make things from wood, like tables, like chairs, like sofas, lots of things from wood. Desks. My desk that I'm on is made from wood. A carpenter would have made that. So carpenters still exist today because that's how we make things, but they often work in a factory or something like that and use machines to help them. Back then, they would have just used their hands. So it would have been much, much more longer, taken them a long time to make something. Firefighter, as we know, they didn't really exist, did they? So that's something that changed. So we're going to think now about some questions about life in 1666, how it was different. So what you're going to do is you've got 4 questions to answer. I want you to work your way through them. You can either write a sentence about it, or even better, and I'll be giving dojo points to children that upload a video of them explaining it instead. So let's have a look at the questions. First one says, you want to visit your family on the other side of London. So that means you want to see your family, but they live far away. How will you get there in 1666? And how would you get there now? Next one, your house is too cold. How do you make the room warmer in 1666? And now, what do you do? You're feeling hungry. What are you going to have for dinner? And how will you make it in 1666 and now? It's getting dark, but you want to write in your diary. What will you do in 1666 and now? So go through all of the questions one at a time. Think about what you would have done in 1666 and what you would do now. So you can either type your answer or record a video. Have a lovely day.